Hello. And welcome back to the Strange Tales podcast. This week we will take a look at the life and times of Howard Hughes. The American business magnate, investor, record-setting pilot, engineer, film director, and philanthropist, known during his lifetime as one of the most influential and financially successful individuals in the world. He first became prominent as a film producer, and then as an important figure in the aviation industry. Later in life, he became known for his eccentric behavior and reclusive lifestyle oddities that were caused in part by his worsening obsessive-compulsive disorder. Okay, let's get into today's strange tale. Records locate the birthplace of Howard Hughes as either Humble or Houston, Texas. The date remains uncertain because of conflicting dates from various sources. He repeatedly claimed Christmas Eve as his birthday. A 1941 affidavit birth certificate of Hughes, signed by his aunt Annette Gano Loomis and by Estelle Borton Sharp, states that he was born on December 24, 1905, in Harris County, Texas. However, his certificate of baptism, recorded on October 7, 1906, in the parish register of St. John's Episcopal Church in Keokuk, Iowa, listed his date of birth as September 24, 1905, without any reference to the place of birth. Howard Robard Hughes Jr. was the son of Aline Stone Gano and of Howard R. Hughes Sr., a successful inventor and businessman from Missouri. He had English, Welsh and some French Huguenot ancestry, and was a descendant of John Gano, the minister who allegedly baptized George Washington. His father patented 1909 the two-cone roller bit, which allowed rotary drilling for petroleum in previously inaccessible places. The senior Hughes made the shrewd and lucrative decision to commercialize the invention by leasing the bits instead of selling them, obtained several early patents, and founded the Hughes Tool Company in 1909. Hughes's uncle was the famed novelist, screenwriter, and film director Rupert Hughes. At a young age, Hughes showed interest in science and technology. In particular, he had great engineering aptitude and built Houston's first wireless radio transmitter at age 11. He went on to be one of the first licensed ham radio operators in Houston, having the assigned call sign W5Psi. At 12, Hughes was photographed in the local newspaper, identified as the first boy in Houston to have a motorized bicycle, which he had built from parts from his father's steam engine. He was an indifferent student, with a liking for mathematics, flying, and mechanics. He took his first flying lesson at 14, and attended Fessenden School in Massachusetts in 1921. After a brief stint at the Thatcher School, Hughes attended math and aeronautical engineering courses at Caltech. The red brick house where Hughes lived as a teenager at 3921 Yoakum Boulevard, Houston, still stands, now on the grounds of the University of St. Thomas. His mother Aline died in March 1922 from complications of an ectopic pregnancy. Howard Hughes Sr. died of a heart attack in 1924. Their deaths apparently inspired Hughes to include the establishment of a medical research laboratory in the will that he signed in 1925 at age 19. Howard Sr.'s will had not been updated since Aline's death, and Hughes inherited 75% of the family fortune. On his 19th birthday, Hughes was declared an emancipated minor, enabling him to take full control of his life. From a young age, Hughes became a proficient and enthusiastic golfer. He often scored near-par figures, played the game to a 2-3 handicap during his 20s, and for a time aimed for a professional golf career. He golfed frequently with top players, including Gene Sarazen. Hughes rarely played competitively and gradually gave up his passion for the sport to pursue other interests. Hughes played golf every afternoon at LA courses including the Lakeside Golf Club, Wilshire Country Club, or the Bel Air Country Club. Partners included George Von Elm or Ozzie Carlton. After Hughes hurt himself in the late 1920s, his golfing tapered off, and after his F-11 crash, Hughes was unable to play at all. Hughes withdrew from Rice University shortly after his father's death. On June 1, 1925, he married Ella Botts Rice, daughter of David Rice and Martha Lawson Botts of Houston, and great-niece of William Marsh Rice, for whom Rice University was named. They moved to Los Angeles, where he hoped to make a name for himself as a filmmaker. They moved into the Ambassador Hotel, and Hughes proceeded to learn to fly a Waco, while simultaneously producing his first motion picture, Swell Hogan. Ralph Graves persuaded Hughes to finance a short film, Swell Hogan, which Graves had written and would star in. Hughes himself produced it. However, it was a disaster. After hiring a film editor to try to salvage it, he finally ordered that it be destroyed. His next two films, Everybody's Acting in 1926, and Two Arabian Nights in 1927, achieved financial success. The latter won the first Academy Award for Best Director of a Comedy Picture. The Racket in 1928, and The Front Page in 1931, were also nominated for Academy Awards. Hughes spent $3.5 million to make the flying film Hell's Angels in 1930. Hell's Angels received one Academy Award nomination for Best Cinematography. Hello. He produced another hit, and welcome Scarface in 1932. Production was delayed by censor's concern over its times of Howard Hughes. The Outlaw premiered in 1943, but was not released nationally until 1946. Engineer, film director, and philanthropist, who received during his lifetime as one of the most influential and financially successful revealing costumes. Hughes was on the cover of Time magazine, July 1948, with the Hughes H4 Hercules in the background. From the 1940s to the late 1950s, the Hughes Tool Company ventured into the film industry when it obtained partial ownership of the RKO companies, which included RKO Pictures, RKO Studios, a chain of movie theaters known as RKO Theaters, and a network of radio stations known as the RKO Radio Network. In 1948, Hughes gained control of RKO, a struggling major Hollywood studio, by acquiring the 929,000 shares owned by Floyd Odlum's Atlas Corporation, for $8,825,000. Within weeks of acquiring the studio, Hughes dismissed 700 employees. Production dwindled to only 9 pictures during the first year of Hughes's control. Previously, RKO had averaged 30 per year. Production shut down for 6 months, during which time Hughes ordered investigations of each employee who remained with RKO as far as their political leanings were concerned. Only after ensuring that the stars under contract had no suspect affiliations would Hughes approve completed pictures to be sent back for reshooting. This was especially true of the women under contract at that time. If Hughes felt that his stars did not properly represent the political views of his liking, or if a film's anti-communist politics were not sufficiently clear, he pulled the plug. In 1952, an abortive sale to a Chicago-based group connected to the mafia with no experience in the industry disrupted studio operations even further. In 1953, Hughes became involved with a high-profile lawsuit as part of the settlement of the United States v. Paramount Pictures. As a result of the hearings, the shaky status of RKO became increasingly apparent. A steady stream of lawsuits from minority shareholders had grown to become extremely annoying to Hughes. They had accused him of financial misconduct and corporate mismanagement. Since Hughes wanted to focus primarily on his aircraft manufacturing and TWA holdings during the years of the Korean War of 1950 to 1953, Hughes offered to buy out all other stockholders in order to dispense with their distractions. By the end of 1954, Hughes had gained near total control of RKO at a cost of nearly $24 million, becoming the first sole owner of a major Hollywood studio since the silent film era. 6 months later, Hughes sold the studio to the General Tire and Rubber Company for $25 million. Hughes retained the rights to pictures that he had personally produced, including those made at RKO. He also retained Jane Russell's contract. For Howard Hughes, this was the virtual end of his 25-year involvement in the motion picture industry. However, his reputation as a financial wizard emerged unscathed. During that time period, RKO became known as the home of classic film noir productions, thanks in part to the limited budgets required to make such films during Hughes's tenure. Hughes reportedly walked away from RKO having made $6.5 million in personal profit. According to Noah Dietrich, Hughes made a $10 million profit from the sale of the theaters and made a profit of $1 million from his 7-year ownership of RKO. According to Noah Dietrich, land became a principal asset for the Hughes empire. Hughes acquired 1,200 acres in Culver City for Hughes Aircraft, bought 7 sections 4,480 acres in Tucson for his Falcon missile plant, and purchased 25,000 acres near Las Vegas. In 1968, the Hughes Tool Company purchased the North Las Vegas Air Terminal. Initially staying in the Desert Inn, Hughes refused to vacate his room, and instead decided to purchase the entire hotel. Hughes extended his financial empire to include Las Vegas real estate, hotels, and media outlets, spending an estimated $300 million, and using his considerable powers to take over many of the well-known hotels, especially the venues connected with organized crime. He quickly became one of the most powerful men in Las Vegas. He was instrumental in changing the image of Las Vegas from its Wild West roots into a more refined cosmopolitan city. In addition to the Desert Inn, Hughes would eventually own the Sands, Frontier, Silver Slipper, Castaways and Landmark and Harold's Club in Reno. Hughes would eventually become the largest employer in Nevada. Another portion of Hughes's commercial interests involved aviation, airlines, and the aerospace and defense industries. A lifelong aircraft enthusiast and pilot, Hughes survived 4 airplane accidents. 1 at Thomas Morse Scout while filming Hell's Angels. 1 while setting the airspeed record in the Hughes Racer. 1 at Lake Mead in 1943, and the near-fatal crash of the Hughes XF-11 in 1946. At Rogers Airport in Los Angeles, he learned to fly from pioneer aviators, including Moyer Stevens and J.B. Alexander. He set many world records and commissioned the construction of custom aircraft for himself while heading Hughes Aircraft at the airport in Glendale. Operating from there, the most technologically important aircraft he commissioned was the Hughes H1 Racer. On September 13, 1935, Hughes, flying the H-1, set the landplane airspeed record of 352 miles per hour, 566 kilometers per hour, over his test course near Santa Ana, California. This marked the last time in history that an aircraft built by a private individual set the world airspeed record. A year and a half later, on January 19, 1937, flying the same H-1 Racer fitted with longer wings, Hughes set a new transcontinental airspeed record by flying non-stop from Los Angeles to Newark in 7 hours, 28 minutes, and 25 seconds. Beating his own previous record of 9 hours, 27 minutes. The H-1 Racer featured a number of design innovations. It had retractable landing gear, and all rivets and joints set flush into the body of the aircraft to reduce drag. The H-1 Racer is thought to have influenced the design of a number of World War II fighters such as the Mitsubishi A6M0, Focke-Wulf FW-190, and F-8F Bearcat, although that has never been reliably confirmed. The H-1 Racer was donated to the Smithsonian. On July 14, 1938, Hughes set another record by completing a flight around the world in just 91 hours, which was 3 days, 19 hours, 17 minutes, beating the previous record set in 1933 by Wiley Post in a single-engine Lockheed Vega by almost 4 days. Hughes returned home ahead of photographs of his flight. Taking off from New York City, Hughes continued to Paris, Moscow, Omsk, Yakutsk, Fairbanks, and Minneapolis, then returning to New York City. For this flight he flew a Lockheed 14 Super Electra fitted with the latest radio and navigational equipment. Harry Connor was the co-pilot, Thomas Thurlow the navigator, Richard Stoddart the engineer, and Ed Lund the mechanic. Hughes wanted the flight to be a triumph of American aviation technology, illustrating that safe, long-distance air travel was possible. Albert Lodwick of Mystic, Iowa, provided organizational skills as the flight operations manager. While Hughes had previously been relatively obscure despite his wealth, being better known for dating Katharine Hepburn, New York City now gave him a ticker-tape parade in the Canyon of Heroes. Hughes and his crew were awarded the 1938 Collier Trophy for flying around the world in record time. He was awarded the Harmon Trophy in 1936 and 1938 for the record-breaking global circumnavigation. Other aviator awards include the Bibesco Cup of the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale in 1938, the Octave Chanute Award in 1940, and a special Congressional Gold Medal in 1939, in recognition of the achievements of Howard Hughes in advancing the science of aviation, and thus bringing great credit to his country throughout the world. President Harry S. Truman sent the Congressional Medal to Hughes after the F-11 crash. After his around-the-world flight, Hughes had declined to go to the White House to collect it. The Hughes D2 was conceived in 1939 as a bomber with 5 crew members, powered by 42-cylinder Wright 2160 Tornado engines. In the end, it appeared as 2-seat fighter reconnaissance aircraft, designated the D2A, powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney engines. The aircraft was constructed using the Duramold process. The prototype was brought to Harper's Dry Lake in California in great secrecy in 1943, and first flew on June 20th of that year. Acting on a recommendation of the president's son, Colonel Elliott Roosevelt, who had become friends with Hughes, in September 1943 the U.S. Air Force ordered 100 of a reconnaissance development of the D2, known as the F-11. Hughes then attempted to get the military to pay for the development of the D2. In November 1944, the hangar containing the D2A was reportedly hit by lightning, and the aircraft was destroyed. The D2 design was abandoned but led to the extremely controversial Hughes XF-11. The XF-11 was a large, all-metal, 2-seat reconnaissance aircraft, powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney engines, each driving a set of contra-rotating propellers. Only 2 prototypes were completed, the second one with a single propeller per side. In the spring of 1943 Hughes spent nearly a month in Las Vegas, test flying his Sikorsky S-43 amphibious aircraft, practicing touch-and-go landings on Lake Mead in preparation for flying the H-4 Hercules. The weather conditions of the lake during the day were ideal and he enjoyed Las Vegas at night. On May 17, 1943, Hughes flew the Sikorsky from California, carrying 2 aviation inspectors, 2 of his employees, and actress Ava Gardner. Hughes dropped Gardner off in Las Vegas and proceeded to Lake Mead to conduct qualifying tests in the S-43. The test flight did not go well. The Sikorsky crashed into Lake Mead, killing Inspector Seco Klein and Hughes's employee Richard Felt. Hughes suffered a severe gash on the top of his head when he hit the upper control panel and had to be rescued by one of the others on board. Hughes paid divers $100,000 to raise the aircraft and later spent more than $500,000 restoring it. Hughes sent the plane to Houston, where it remained for many years. Hughes was involved in another near-fatal aircraft accident on July 7, 1946, while performing the first flight of the prototype U.S. Army Air Force's reconnaissance aircraft, the XF-11, near Hughes Airfield at Culver City, California. An oil leak caused one of the contra-rotating propellers to reverse pitch, causing the aircraft to yaw sharply and lose altitude rapidly. Hughes attempted to save the aircraft by landing it at the Los Angeles Country Club golf course, but just seconds before reaching the course, the XF-11 started to drop dramatically and crashed in the Beverly Hills neighborhood surrounding the country club. When the XF-11 finally came to a halt after destroying 3 houses, the fuel tanks exploded, setting fire to the aircraft and a nearby home at 808 North Whittier Drive owned by Lieutenant Colonel Charles E. Meyer. Hughes managed to pull himself out of the flaming wreckage but lay beside the aircraft until rescued by Marine Master Sergeant William L. Durkin, who happened to be in the area visiting friends. Hughes sustained significant injuries in the crash, including a crushed collarbone, multiple cracked ribs, crushed chest with collapsed left lung, shifting his heart to the right side of the chest cavity, and numerous third-degree burns. Despite his physical injuries, Hughes took pride that his mind was still working. As he lay in his hospital bed, he decided that he did not like the bed's design. He called in plant engineers to design a customized bed, equipped with hot and cold running water, built in 6 sections, and operated by 30 electric motors, with push-button adjustments. Hughes designed the hospital bed specifically to alleviate the pain caused by moving with severe burn injuries. Although he never used the bed that he designed, Hughes's bed served as a prototype for the modern hospital bed. Hughes's doctors considered his recovery almost miraculous. The War Production Board, not the military, originally contracted with Henry Kaiser and Hughes to produce the gigantic HK-1 Hercules flying boat for use during World War II, to transport troops and equipment across the Atlantic as an alternative to seagoing troop transport ships that were vulnerable to German U-boats. The military services opposed the project, thinking it would siphon resources from higher priority programs, but Hughes's powerful allies in Washington, D.C., advocated for it. After disputes, Kaiser withdrew from the project and Hughes elected to continue it as the H-4 Hercules. However, the aircraft was not completed until after the end of World War II. The Hercules was the world's largest flying boat, the largest aircraft made from wood, and, at 319 feet 11 inches, 97.51 meters, had the longest wingspan of any aircraft. The Hercules flew only once for 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, and 70 feet, 21 meters, above the water, with Hughes at the controls, on November 2, 1947. Critics nicknamed the Hercules the Spruce Goose, but it was actually made largely from birch rather than from aluminium, because the contract required that Hughes build the aircraft of non-strategic materials. It was built in Hughes's Westchester, California, facility. In 1947, Howard Hughes was summoned to testify before the Senate War Investigating Committee to explain why the H-4 development had been so troubled, and why $22 million had produced only 2 prototypes of the XF-11. General Elliott Roosevelt and numerous other U.S. Air Force officers were also called to testify in hearings that transfixed the nation during August and November 1947. In hotly disputed testimony over TWA's route awards and malfeasance in the defense acquisition process, Hughes turned the tables on his main interlocutor, Maine Senator Owen Brewster, and the hearings were widely interpreted as a Hughes victory. After being displayed at the harbor of Long Beach, California, the Hercules was moved to McMinnville, Oregon, where as of 2020 it features at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum. In 1932 Hughes founded the Hughes Aircraft Company, a division of Hughes Tool Company, in a rented corner of a Lockheed Aircraft Corporation hangar in Burbank, California, to build the H1 Racer. Shortly after founding the company, Hughes used the alias Charles Howard to accept a job as a baggage handler for American Airlines. He was soon promoted to co-pilot. Hughes continued to work for American Airlines until his real identity was discovered. During and after World War II, Hughes fashioned his company into a major defense contractor. The Hughes Helicopters division started in 1947 when helicopter manufacturer Kellett sold their latest design to Hughes for production. Hughes Aircraft became a major American aerospace and defense contractor, manufacturing numerous technology-related products that included spacecraft vehicles, military aircraft, radar systems, electro-optical systems, the first working laser, aircraft computer systems, missile systems, ion propulsion engines, commercial satellites, and other electronics systems. In 1948, Hughes created a new division of Hughes Aircraft, the Hughes Aerospace Group. The Hughes Space and Communications Group and the Hughes Space Systems Division were later spun off in 1948 to form their own divisions and ultimately became the Hughes Space and Communications Company in 1961. In 1953, Howard Hughes gave all his stock in the Hughes Aircraft Company to the newly formed Howard Hughes Medical Institute, thereby turning the aerospace and defense contractor into a tax-exempt charitable organization. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute sold Hughes Aircraft in 1985 to General Motors for $5.2 billion. In 1997, General Motors sold Hughes Aircraft to Raytheon, and in 2000, sold Hughes Space and Communications to Boeing. A combination of Boeing, GM, and Raytheon acquired the Hughes Research Laboratories, which focused on advanced developments in microelectronics, information and systems sciences, materials, sensors, and photonics. Their workspace spans from basic research to product delivery. It has particularly emphasized capabilities in high-performance integrated circuits, high-power lasers, antennas, networking, and smart materials. In 1939, at the urging of Jack Fry, president of TWA, Hughes began to quietly purchase a majority share of TWA stock. He took a controlling interest in the airline by 1944. Although he never had an official position with TWA, Hughes handpicked the board of directors, which included Noah Dietrich, and often issued orders directly to airline staff. Hughes Tool Company purchased the first 6 Stratoliners Boeing manufactured. Hughes used one personally, and he let TWA operate the other 5. Hughes is commonly credited as the driving force behind the Lockheed Constellation airliner, which Hughes and Fry ordered in 1939 as a long-range replacement for TWA's fleet of Boeing 307 Stratoliners. Hughes personally financed TWA's acquisition of 40 Constellations for $18 million, the largest aircraft order in history up to that time. The Constellations were among the highest-performing commercial aircraft of the late 1940s and 1950s and allowed TWA to pioneer non-stop transcontinental service. During World War II, Hughes leveraged political connections in Washington to obtain rights for TWA to serve Europe, making it the only U.S. carrier with a combination of domestic and transatlantic routes. After the announcement of the Boeing 707, Hughes opted to pursue a more advanced jet aircraft for TWA and approached Convair in late 1954. Convair proposed 2 concepts to Hughes, but Hughes was unable to decide which concept to adopt, and Convair eventually abandoned its initial jet project after the mock-ups of the 707 and Douglas DC-8 were unveiled. Even after competitors such as United Airlines, American Airlines and Pan American World Airways had placed large orders for the 707, Hughes only placed 8 orders for 707s through the Hughes Tool Company and forbade TWA from using the aircraft. After finally beginning to reserve 707 orders in 1956, Hughes embarked on a plan to build his own superior jet aircraft for TWA, applied for cab permission to sell Hughes aircraft to TWA, and began negotiations with the state of Florida to build a manufacturing plant there. However, He abandoned this plan around 1958, and in the interim, negotiated new contracts for 707 and Convair 880 aircraft and engines totaling $400 million. The financing of TWA's jet orders precipitated the end of Hughes's relationship with Noah Dietrich, and ultimately Hughes's ouster from control of TWA. Hughes did not have enough cash on hand or future cash flow to pay for the orders and did not immediately seek bank financing. Hughes's refusal to heed Dietrich's financing advice led to a major rift between the two by the end of 1956. Hughes believed that Dietrich wished to have Hughes committed as mentally incompetent, although the evidence of this is inconclusive. Dietrich resigned by telephone in May 1957 after repeated requests for stock options, which Hughes refused to grant, and with no further progress on the jet financing. As Hughes's mental state worsened, he ordered various tactics to delay payments to Boeing and Convair. His behavior led TWA's banks to insist that he be removed from management as a condition for further financing. In 1960, Hughes was ultimately forced out of the management of TWA, although he continued to own 78% of the company. In 1961, TWA filed suit against Hughes Tool Company, claiming that the latter had violated antitrust law by using TWA as a captive market for aircraft trading. The claim was largely dependent upon obtaining testimony from Hughes himself. Hughes went into hiding and refused to testify. A default judgment was issued against Hughes Tool Company for $135 million in 1963 but was overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1973, on the basis that Hughes was immune from prosecution. In 1966, Hughes was forced to sell his TWA shares. The sale of his TWA shares brought Hughes $546,549,771. In 1970, Hughes acquired San Francisco-based Air West, and renamed it Hughes Air West. Hughes Air West operated an all-jet fleet of Boeing 727s, Douglas DC-9s, and McDonnell Douglas DC-9s jetliners, serving an extensive route network in the western U.S. with flights to Mexico and western Canada. By 1980, the airline's route system reached as far east as Houston and Milwaukee, with a total of 42 destinations being served. Hughes Air West was then acquired by and merged into Republic Airlines in late 1980. Republic was subsequently acquired by and merged into Northwest Airlines, which in turn was ultimately merged into Delta Air Lines in 2008. Hughes had made numerous business partnerships through industrialist and producer David Charney. Their friendship and many partnerships began with the film The Conqueror, which was first released to the public in 1956. The film caused many controversies due to its critical flop and radioactive location used in St. George, Utah, that eventually led to Hughes buying up nearly every copy of the film he could, only to watch the film at home repeatedly for many nights in a row. Hughes and Charney's most published dealings were with a contested Air West leveraged buyout. Charney led the buyout group that involved Howard Hughes and their partners acquiring Air West. Hughes, Charney, as well as 3 others, were indicted. The indictment, made by U.S. Attorney, accused the group of conspiring to drive down the stock price of Air West in order to pressure company directors to sell to Hughes. The charges were dismissed after a judge had determined that the indictment had failed to allege an illegal action on the part of Hughes, Charney, and all the other accused in the indictment. Thompson, the federal judge that made the decision to dismiss the charges, called the indictment one of the worst claims that he had ever seen. The charges were filed again, a second time, by U.S. Attorney's Assistant, Dean Vernon. The federal judge ruled on November 13, 1974, and elaborated to say that the case suggested a reprehensible misuse of the power of great wealth. But in his judicial opinion, no crime had been committed. The aftermath of the Air West deal was later settled with the SEC by paying former stockholders for alleged losses from the sale of their investment in Air West stock. In 1953, Hughes launched the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Miami, Florida, with the expressed goal of basic biomedical research, including trying to understand, in Hughes's words, the genesis of life itself, due to his lifelong interest in science and technology. Hughes's first will, which he signed in 1925 at the age of 19, stipulated that a portion of his estate should be used to create a medical institute bearing his name. When a major battle with the IRS loomed ahead, Hughes gave all his stock in the Hughes Aircraft Company to the institute, thereby turning the aerospace and defense contractor into a for-profit entity of a fully tax-exempt charity. Hughes's internist, Vern Mason, who treated Hughes after his 1946 aircraft crash, was chairman of the Institute's Medical Advisory Committee. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute's new board of trustees sold Hughes aircraft in 1985 to General Motors for $5.2 billion, allowing the institute to grow dramatically. Hughes dated many famous women, including Joan Crawford, Billy Dove, Faith DeMeg, Betty Davis, Yvonne DiCarlo, Ava Gardner, Olivia de Havilland, Katharine Hepburn, Hedy Lamarr, Ginger Rogers, Janet Leigh, Mamie Van Doren, and Jean Tierney. He also proposed to Joan Fontaine several times. Jean Harlow accompanied him to the premiere of Hell's Angels, but Noah Dietrich wrote many years later that the relationship was strictly professional, as Hughes disliked Harlow personally. On July 11, 1936, Hughes struck and killed a pedestrian named Gabriel S. Meyer with his car at the corner of 3rd Street and Lorraine in Los Angeles. After the crash, Hughes was taken to the hospital and certified as sober, but an attending doctor made a note that Hughes had been drinking. A witness to the crash told police that Hughes was driving erratically and too fast and that Meyer had been standing in the safety zone of a streetcar stop. Hughes was booked on suspicion of negligent homicide and held overnight in jail until his attorney, Neil S. McCarthy, obtained a writ of habeas corpus for his release pending a coroner's inquest. By the time of the coroner's inquiry, however, the witness had changed his story and claimed that Meyer had moved directly in front of Hughes's car. Nancy Bailey Watts, who was in the car with Hughes at the time of the crash, corroborated this version of the story. On July 16, 1936, Hughes was held blameless by a coroner's jury at the inquest into Meyer's death. Hughes told reporters outside the inquiry, "I was driving slowly and a man stepped out of the darkness in front of me." On January 12, 1957, Hughes married actress Jean Peters at a small hotel in Tonopah, Nevada. The couple met in the 1940s, before Peters became a film actress. They had a highly publicized romance in 1947 and there was talk of marriage, but she said she could not combine it with her career. Some later claimed that Peters was the only woman Hughes ever loved, and he reportedly had his security officers follow her everywhere even when they were not in a relationship. Such reports were confirmed by actor Max Showalter, who became a close friend of Peters while shooting Niagara. Showalter told an interviewer that because he frequently met with Peters, Hughes's men threatened to ruin his career if he did not leave her alone. Dietrich wrote that Hughes always ate the same thing for dinner, a New York strip steak, cooked medium rare, dinner salad, and peas, but only the smaller ones, pushing the larger ones aside. For breakfast, Hughes wanted his eggs cooked the way his family cook, Lily, made them. Hughes had a phobia about germs, and his passion for secrecy became a mania. While directing The Outlaw, Hughes became fixated on a small flaw in one of Jane Russell's blouses, claiming that the fabric bunched up along a seam and gave the appearance of two nipples on each breast. He wrote a detailed memorandum to the crew on how to fix the problem. Richard Fleischer, who directed His Kind of Woman with Hughes as executive producer, wrote at length in his autobiography about the difficulty of dealing with the tycoon. In his book, Just Tell Me When to Cry, Fleischer explained that Hughes was fixated on trivial details and was alternately indecisive and obstinate. He also revealed that Hughes's unpredictable mood swings made him wonder if the film would ever be completed. In 1958, Hughes told his aides that he wanted to screen some movies at a film studio near his home. He stayed in the studio's darkened screening room for more than 4 months, never leaving. He ate only chocolate bars and chicken and drank only milk, and was surrounded by dozens of Kleenex that he continuously stacked and rearranged. He wrote detailed memos to his aides giving them explicit instructions neither to look at him nor speak to him unless spoken to. Throughout this period, Hughes sat fixated in his chair, often naked, continually watching movies. When he finally emerged in the summer of 1958, his hygiene was terrible. He had neither bathed nor cut his hair and nails for weeks. This may have been due to allodynia, which results in a pain response to stimuli that would normally not cause pain. After the screening room incident, Hughes moved into a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel where he also rented rooms for his aides, his wife, and numerous girlfriends. He would sit naked in his bedroom with a pink hotel napkin placed over his genitals, watching movies. This may have been because Hughes found the touch of clothing painful due to allodynia. He may have watched movies to distract himself from his pain, a common practice among patients with intractable pain, especially those who do not receive adequate treatment. In 1 year, Hughes spent an estimated $11 million at the hotel. Hughes began purchasing restaurant chains and 4-star hotels that had been founded within the state of Texas. This included, if for only a short period, many unknown franchises currently out of business. He placed ownership of the restaurants with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and all licenses were resold shortly after. Another time, he became obsessed with the 1968 film Ice Station Zebra, and had it run on a continuous loop in his home. Hughes insisted on using tissues to pick up objects to insulate himself from germs. He would also notice dust, stains, or other imperfections on people's clothes and demand that they take care of them. Once one of the most visible men in America, Hughes ultimately vanished from public view, although tabloids continued to follow rumors of his behavior and whereabouts. He was reported to be terminally ill, mentally unstable, or even dead. Injuries from numerous aircraft crashes caused Hughes to spend much of his later life in pain, and he eventually became addicted to codeine, which he injected intramuscular. Hughes had his hair cut and nails trimmed only once a year. He also stored his urine in bottles. The wealthy and aging Hughes, accompanied by his entourage of personal aides, began moving from one hotel to another, always taking up residence in the top-floor penthouse. In the last 10 years of his life, 1966 to 1976, Hughes lived in hotels in many cities, including Beverly Hills, Boston, Las Vegas, Nassau, Freeport, and Vancouver. On November 24, 1966, Thanksgiving Day, Hughes arrived in Las Vegas by railroad car and moved into the Desert Inn. Because he refused to leave the hotel and to avoid further conflicts with the owners, Hughes bought the Desert Inn in early 1967. The hotel's 8th floor became the nerve center of Hughes's empire, and the 9th floor penthouse became his personal residence. Between 1966 and 1968, he bought several other hotel casinos, including the Castaways, New Frontier, the Landmark Hotel and Casino, and the Sands. He bought the small Silver Slipper Casino for the sole purpose of moving its trademark neon silver slipper, which was visible from his bedroom, and had apparently kept him awake at night. After Hughes left the Desert Inn, hotel employees discovered that his drapes had not been opened during the time he lived there and had rotted through. As an owner of several major Las Vegas businesses, Hughes wielded much political and economic influence in Nevada and elsewhere. During the 1960s and early 1970s, he disapproved of underground nuclear testing at the Nevada test site. Hughes was concerned about the risk from residual nuclear radiation and attempted to halt the tests. When the tests finally went through despite Hughes's efforts, the detonations were powerful enough that the entire hotel where he was staying trembled due to the shock waves. In two separate, last-ditch maneuvers, Hughes instructed his representatives to offer million-dollar bribes to both Presidents Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon. In 1970, Jean Peters filed for divorce. The two had not lived together for many years. Peters requested a lifetime alimony payment of $70,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, and waived all claims to Hughes's estate. Hughes offered her a settlement of over $1 million, but she declined it. Hughes did not insist on a confidentiality agreement from Peters as a condition of the divorce. Aides reported that Hughes never spoke ill of her. She refused to discuss her life with Hughes and declined several lucrative offers from publishers and biographers. Peters would state only that she had not seen Hughes for several years before their divorce and had dealt with him only by phone. Hughes was living in the Intercontinental Hotel near Lake Managua in Nicaragua, seeking privacy and security, when a magnitude 6.5 earthquake damaged Managua in December 1972. As a precaution, Hughes moved first to a rather large tent, facing the hotel, then after a few days there to the Nicaraguan National Palace and stayed there as a guest of Anastasio Somoza Dávila before leaving for Florida on a private jet the following day. He subsequently moved into the penthouse at the Xanadu Princess Resort on Grand Bahama Island, which he had recently purchased. He lived almost exclusively in the penthouse of the Xanadu Beach Resort and Marina for the last 4 years of his life. In 1972, author Clifford Irving caused a media sensation when he claimed he had co-written an authorized autobiography of Hughes. Hughes was so reclusive that he did not immediately publicly refute Irving's statement, leading many to believe that Irving's book was genuine. However, before the book's publication, Hughes finally denounced Irving in a teleconference, and the entire project was eventually exposed as a hoax. Irving was later convicted of fraud and spent 17 months in prison. In 1974, the Orson Welles film F for Fake included a section on the Hughes autobiography hoax, leaving a question open as to whether it was actually Hughes who took part in the teleconference, since so few people had actually heard or seen him in recent years. In 1977, the hoax by Clifford Irving was published in the United Kingdom, telling his story of these events. The 2006 film The Hoax, starring Richard Gere, is also based on these events. Hughes is reported to have died on April 5, 1976, at 1:27 p.m. on board an aircraft, owned by Robert Graff and piloted by Jeff Abrams. He was en route from his penthouse at the Acapulco Princess Hotel, now the Fairmont Acapulco Princess, in Mexico to the Methodist Hospital in Houston. His reclusiveness and possibly his drug use made him practically unrecognizable. His hair, beard, fingernails, and toenails were long. His tall 6 feet 4 in, 193 centimeters, frame now weighed barely 90 pounds, 41 kilograms, and the FBI had to use fingerprints to conclusively identify the body. Howard Hughes's alias, John T. Conover, was used when his body arrived at a morgue in Houston on the day of his death. An autopsy recorded kidney failure as the cause of death. In an 18-month study investigating Hughes' drug abuse for the estate, it was found someone administered a deadly injection of the painkiller to this comatose man. Obviously needlessly, and almost certainly fatal. He suffered from malnutrition and was covered in bed sores. While his kidneys were damaged, his other internal organs, including his brain, which had no visible damage or illnesses, were deemed perfectly healthy. X-rays revealed 5 broken-off hypodermic needles in the flesh of his arms to inject codeine into his muscles. Hughes had used glass syringes with metal needles that easily became detached. Following his death, Hughes was subject to several widely rebuked conspiracy theories that he had faked his own death. A notable allegation came from retired Major General Mark Music, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, who claimed Hughes went on to live under an assumed identity, dying on November 15, 2001 in Troy, Alabama. Approximately 3 weeks after Hughes's death, a handwritten will was found on the desk of an official of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, Utah. The so-called Mormon will gave $1.56 billion to various charitable organizations, including $625 million to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, nearly $470 million to the upper management in Hughes's companies and to his aides, $156 million to first cousin William Loomis, and $156 million split equally between his 2 ex-wives Ella Rice and Jean Peters. A further $156 million was endowed to a gas station owner, Melvin Dumas, who told reporters that in 1967, he found a disheveled and dirty man lying along U.S. Route 95, just 150 miles, 240 kilometers, north of Las Vegas. The man asked for a ride to Vegas. Dropping him off at the Sands Hotel, Dumas said the man told him that he was Hughes. Dumas later claimed that days after Hughes's death a mysterious man appeared at his gas station, leaving an envelope containing the will on his desk. Unsure if the will was genuine, and unsure of what to do, Dumas left the will at the LDS church office. In 1978, a Nevada court ruled the Mormon will a forgery and officially declared that Hughes had died intestate, without a valid will. Dumas' story was later adapted into Jonathan Demme's film Melvin and Howard in 1980. Hughes's $2.5 billion estate was eventually split in 1983 among 22 cousins, including William Loomis, who serves as a trustee of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled that Hughes aircraft was owned by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which sold it to General Motors in 1985 for $5.2 billion. The court rejected suits by the states of California and Texas that claimed they were owed inheritance tax. In 1984, Hughes's estate paid an undisclosed amount to Terry Moore, who claimed she and Hughes had secretly married on a yacht in international waters off Mexico in 1949 and never divorced. Moore never produced proof of a marriage, but her book, The Beauty and the Billionaire, became a bestseller. Thank you all so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed today's strange tale. If you did, please smash that gorgeous like button and subscribe so that you will be notified to future shows. Also, if you could write a 5-star review, that would really help us get the word out, so other people can enjoy the podcast as well. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube at Strange Tales Pod. Or you can message me at strangetalespod@gmail.com with feedback or ideas on future shows. This is your host Winston R. Douglas signing out for now. Thanks again. Hope to see you again soon.